I've heard people say they can only write songs when they feel a creative spark or at night. I used to believe this. It's not true. You can create songs at all hours of the day. People create this weight of expectation in their head, and it prevents them from writing a song. It's all in your head. You can make music whenever you feel like it or when you don't feel like it. If you just lock in, throw the phone on silent, focus your mind, you can do it. I promise you. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to show you right here today. So you can get going with literally anything. But I was listening to Morning Coffee this morning. It's a Spotify playlist, had shuffle going here, and I heard this song, Remember That Night by Sarah Kays. And basically I was thinking, like, why don't I grab the acapella for this and see what I can do with it? So I'm going to pull up this program here, which allows me to take the acapella from a song, and we're just going to dive into the project and see if we can reharmonize some chords, come up with a bass line. I'm a dance music producer, house music, so I'm going to make something like that, and we're just going to see what we can generate off the cuff, completely ad hoc. All right, so let's download the song legally, and we're going to drag it into this program here called Lalal. Not a great name there, but we're going to process it and we're going to snag that acapella out of there. And while we're doing that, let's just listen to the song.
The day after you said goodbye, all I did was lay in bed and cry. But after 1 month I started to move on, and after 2 I felt alright.
Skip forward to the chorus.
That night we went for a drive, 2:30 in the morning. I guess you it was boring. We held each other tight before the night was over.
Let's see. Oh, and it's processed it. Perfect. Let's play this vocal, just see how it sounds. Then we're going to drag it straight into the DAW if it sounds good.
The day after
Perfect.
you said goodbye, all I did was lay in bed and cry.
Sounds good to me, so I'm going to fire this up in Logic. All right, so you can see I've got the vocal dragged in here and I've got the instrumental dragged in as well. So the way I usually approach a remix is I don't want to actually change it too much in terms of the foundations of the song. So I will look at the BPM. In this case, we've got this set to 124, which is a perfect BPM for house music. And then I'll look at the key, and this is in G minor. And I really don't like to pitch up vocals or pitch them down. I think that's just too much. You want to keep it true to the original version. You could reharmonize it, but in this case, I think I really just want to create a new arrangement with the elements of the track and put it into the house style. So the first thing I'm going to do is find the chords for the song. From there, once I build out a bit of an arrangement with the chords, I then have a ton of flexibility to write the bass line, to do the drums, to do the synths. So let's start with those chords. So I'm just going to mess around here and see if I can find the chords.
The day after you said goodbye, all I did was lay in bed and cry. But after 1 month I started to move on, and after 2 I felt alright.
So we've got G minor, F sharp major, and then E flat major. And then I'm actually going to play this same note, the root note, and I'm going to play that in the bass to add a little more depth. There we go. And that's just going to serve as the foundation for the track. So as you can see here, I recorded in the notes, and there's a little turn in this section right here. The chords change before we hit the drop, and that's going to be a little C minor, B flat major. And I'll just play that for you to show you what that sounds like.
I was living my life, I was better and didn't have to try.
Sounds a little weird with the piano, but once we get some pads, it's actually going to sound really nice. So I'm a sucker for Italo disco, synth pop, Balearic beat, all of those synth heavy sounds of the late 80s and 90s. So I went ahead and I picked out this preset I had here just straight out of a bank, and it reminded me kind of Jose Padilla's music from Cafe Del Mar in the 90s, or even Giorgio Moroder a little bit. This is what it sounds like. Let's go to the top. So super simple, but it's just giving a nice depth here, and it's going to sound really emotional alongside that fantastic vocal lead. On the chain, I kept it super simple. I just put this directional mixer on there, giving it a little bit of width. And then I threw the Pro Q on there, taking out some low end. And then finally, a little bit of smooth space reverb. So this is what it sounds like again. Next up, I came up with another pad here. This was another Balearic pad. This pad I came up with reminds me a bit of those trance records from the 90s from Paul Oakenfold. It's a little bit more triumphant. It's less subtle than the other one, but I think they pair together really nicely.
But after 1 month, I started to move on, and after 2, I felt alright.
So we're already building this atmosphere. It's starting to sound really big and huge and very different from the original version, which, remember, sounds like this. I'm going to cut these out of this.
The day after, you said.
So it sounds really nice in the original version, but it sounds kind of like acoustic folk. It's got this very organic feel, and now all of a sudden I've added this expansiveness that really contrasts with the original version. So a hallmark of 90s house is having this sustained note. This is a G in this case, and it's going to operate as a pedal tone here. We're just going to hold that throughout, and it creates a sense of tension in the verse. This is what it sounds like. So it sounds very plain, but it will be subtly noticeable to a listener. And I just processed the hell out of this channel, I'll be honest. I cut out almost all of the low end, keeping just the very high. And then I cut out all the mid-range as well. And then I got a bunch of reverbs on here, just affecting it slightly differently. And then again, another Pro Q, just making sure I didn't introduce any sort of low artifacts. And finally, I've got this chorus here to widen it up. And so for the bass, I just picked a simple legato Reese bass. I have one layer playing the mid-range of the bass, the low mid, and then I've got another layer playing the sub frequencies. These two work together really nicely. And again, I didn't want to get too complicated here, just wanted to keep it simple. This is what they sound like. So you get the gist. It's just going to follow along with the root note of each of those chords, and that's going to set up our verse really nicely heading into the chorus. One thing I want to address really quickly, I didn't really change the arrangement of the vocal. I added this little space here between the verse and the chorus so that I could create some tension before that drop hits. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. And I even kept this instrumental element because I felt like it still sounded really good with all of the synths and the bass I added. And really quickly, I want to show you this drum loop I came up with. I didn't want to get bogged down in doing all of the drums right now, but I just wanted to create a little bit of rhythm. So I've got this. So let's bring back in vocals, bass, synths, and drums, and just hear what we've got so far.
All I did was lay in bed and cry. But after 1 month, I started to move on, and after 2, I felt alright.
All right, that's sounding great. So I'm going to shift my attention to the drop, and I'm going to see if I can come up with a melody that's going to work with these chords and work with that vocal. I'm going to have to look around this microphone here, so I'm going to be kind of noodling around and seeing what I can come up with, but we just got to do it. So I got my chord progression, and I'm going to play a little something on the right hand. So I like that. I'm going to actually take a synth lead here and see if I can spruce it up a little bit. So the first thing I do when I'm thinking about synths is I reach for Serum or Dune. In this case, I grabbed Dune because I know it has that lush sound that I'm going for. So pulled that up. Just didn't even mess with this preset here. I think it's just, yeah, it's right from one of the banks here, but it sounded really nice. I did a little bit of processing, took out a couple bands where I felt like there were some pokey frequencies, and then I threw on a little more reverb, keeping a low mix knob, and then I sidechained it, of course, because I know this is going to be my chorus. I'm going to have a big kick here, so I don't want this lead to be interacting with that kick in a negative way. And with my little progression recorded in there, it sounds like this. And immediately I'm thinking this needs more depth. I want this to be really big, so I'm going to bring in a couple other layers. So here's a key tip for layering, and it took me a really long time to figure this out and a lot of trial and error. But basically, when you are layering leads, you want to make sure that you have leads that have different characteristics, both in terms of the timbre. For example, you might want to have a natural sounding layer and then a more synthetic or digitized sounding layer. Additionally, you're going to want to look for differences between the attack and the release. So some of them you're going to want to have a soft attack, and other ones are going to want to have a very fast transient. So I'll show you what I mean here. This is my main lead stack. So I showed you that first layer. I added a couple more separately, and I put a parallel chain on them in order to process them all together. Now the first one is from a synth called Little One. So this is a beautifully modeled synthesizer. It has a great analog sound. I had trouble downloading it, honestly, because it's from a Japanese manufacturing company and everything was in Japanese, but I eventually figured it out. But I've been using it a lot lately. I really like it. And it gives you this really big full sound. Additionally, if you look at my processing here, I'll just go through this real quick. Did the same thing as before, taking out these little pokey notches where I felt like the frequency was overloaded. Threw on a little more reverb, and then one knob pumper, which is just a side chain. But where this gets interesting is I actually sent this to a bus, and this is my delay reverb bus, which makes the sound very, very large. Here I've got track spacer, which is working to sidechain the sound to the kick. Because again, I don't even have a kick yet, but I know the kick is going to come in there, and I don't want these synths to be fighting for it in terms of frequency space. Next, I throw on a plate reverb, 1.85 seconds of decay, and a pretty low mix ratio, but I just wanted this in here to continue to fill out that sound. And finally, I put on Valhalla Supermassive, which is a great delay, and this is a Kygo chorus reverb space. I actually customized this preset here. This is one that I came up with based off of listening to Kygo's songs and listening how he processes some of his leads, such as his lead in the song Freeze. And if you want this, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see if I can drop a link to it so you can download it as well. So we heard that first big synth. I'll play it again right here. Now you'll notice the second synth I added is also from Little One, but this one has slightly different characteristics. This one has a slightly stronger attack to it. I feel like it's almost a little more obtrusive. But when you're layering things, you need to sometimes forget about the individual sound and think about how things are sounding in the mix. And this just worked here. So we're going to move on to the next layer. This one comes from Serum. This was just another preset that I thought was really getting the job done. I was trying to work fast here, so I just went with it. It sounds very in the box, actually. It sounds very digitalized. But again, I was liking how it was sounding with the other synths. I'll play it in solo for you right now. Sounds like Avicii in 2013, so I don't want that to be too prominent in the mix because I think that sound has developed and we're in a little bit of a more modern time now. But nonetheless, it's working in my mix, so I'm going to move on. So making a bridge here between what we started with. Remember that 90s house string? I brought that back in the chorus, and I also kept the chord progression going here, but I added some different pads. So again, it's that G minor and then that F major and E flat major, but we're gonna change the chords here so that it sounds a little different when we hit the chorus and just gives the listener kind of a different feeling. So for this, I went to Serum and I got this angelic preset here. It's very open, so we've got a lot more high end. And additionally, I took LFO2 and I threw that onto the cutoff to create some modulation. Give it a listen. Pretty simple processing on this one. Again, I'm going to take out the lows because I'm going to make a really nice bass line here. I don't want any of the synths to fight with that bass line or the kick for that matter. And I threw on kickstart. So what I did here actually is I EQ'd the side chain. So I'm only side chaining everything below 112 Hertz, which honestly doesn't really matter because I cut that out. But regardless, I finally moved on to using Neutron. And Neutron 3 is just really good at evaluating the other elements in your mix and sometimes making these sort of AI guided suggestions for how this sound could be altered, the ADSR and the timbre. That I felt like in this case, working alongside the other elements I already introduced into the song, such as this 80s pad, which I'll show you in a second, I felt like it was working. So in this case, there's a really nice preset I usually use for this big 80s Juno sounding synth, and this is what I got here. Again, we're going for some modulation on the cutoff there just to create some dynamism in the drop section. Now, the reason I added that modulation in there, that kind of fluttery sound, is because I want this chorus to feel dynamic. I want it to feel like things are changing. And I want to keep the listener engaged throughout. Simple processing on this, taking out some lows as well as track spacer side chained to the kick drum, which I'm going to show you in just a little bit. But first, let's listen to everything together in the drop right now to see what we have. So I really like that so far. I'm going to just go to the drums now and see if we can put some basic drums in and get a groove going. So I went ahead and crafted some of the drums here, and you'll see I've got a couple layers. These are a combination of samples I have from my personal library as well as some samples from some good producers like F9 Samples here. So I'll show you what I did. Now, the key to getting a good kick drum is to understand that sometimes it's not all going to be contained in one single sample. You've got the low kick here, which is going to provide the punch. And I'm just using this one knob fattener as well to give it a little more low end, in fact. I find this plugin works very well. I don't totally understand it other than knowing that it's saturating some of the low end as well as boosting some EQ, but it's fantastic and I use it on almost every kick that I use in a song. And then I actually added a dynamic band EQ here to that low kick. I understand that some purists would question this, but I don't really care because I'm going by my ear and this sounded good to me. That's the low kick layer. And then this is a critical step as well. Oftentimes, you're not going to get all the way there with that single layer. You need a second one, and that's going to be a top kick. That's going to give you a little bit of transient and some high end to really create a cohesive kick that has good presence throughout the frequency range. And I'll show you what I mean. Now, you may not notice why that is important right now, but I guarantee you when I play the full mix together later on, you're going to see that it is vital to have that there. Next loop here is the loop I showed you at the beginning. It just sounds good to me. This is from my personal collection. And this is a really nice crisp clap I added in there, as well as a single shaker. So we got a nice little groove going here in the drop. Next, I brought in another clap, a full shaker loop, and another shaker loop, and finally a top loop. It seems like overkill, but it is a delicate balance to have all of these drums working together. Some of them are playing very auxiliary roles in the mix, but they still just create a nice cohesive sound at the end. And I'll just play this all together for you and you'll see how it sounds different. Kind of like what we were talking about with the synth layering, the singular parts are not going to be as strong as the whole. So you think about the clap itself, you're going to have one that has a fast transient and the second one that has this full body, but together they are far stronger than they were as individuals. I'm probably driving my neighbors nuts right now. Feel kind of bad about it, but I got to show you guys these drums. So if we zoom out, you can see all the drums I have. I really went in on the drums, but we got to remember I'm a house music producer, techno producer. Drums and low end are vital to these songs. So I'm not sorry. All right, so let's hear what we got so far, figure out where we stand. So it sounds pretty solid to me. And all it took was just sitting down and focusing my mind. I was moving quickly. I was sometimes using presets, using trusted samples from my personal library, as well as a couple ones that I have picked up from other people. Basically work fast, use samples from your personal collection that you know are tried and true. Use some presets as well that sound great to you. You don't need to be a purist and do all of the sound design yourself. Pick up the presets that work and keep going. Keep working with the ideas you have. So we've been working on this a little over an hour. I'm really happy with where things stand. I am a big proponent of taking some small breaks, stretch your legs, come back with a fresh perspective because I do think those ideas start to run stale after about an hour and a half. Small break will allow you to reset your mind. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to work on the plucks, the bass line, as well as some effects. All right, so I'm back after a little break and I had the chance to listen through to the song and a couple things occurred to me. I think the mid-range sounds pretty good, but I think I could do a little more in the upper mids to add some momentum and presence. This is what it sounds like right now. And I was thinking, what if I got a pluck in there that just created a little bit of momentum, almost like some bowed cellos in an orchestra. Something like this. So naturally, I reach for Serum, set up oscillator A and B with some triangle waves, 4 voices of unison in the first one, and then take envelope 2, drag that over to the cutoff so I can modulate the cutoff with envelope 2. Of course, I use the internal processing here for Serum, some EQ, delay, reverb, and compressor, standard stuff. But then I also reached for the stereo spreader here just to spread out that sound a little bit. Got kickstart going because this is a plucky lead. I don't want it to fight with the kick too much. And then most importantly, I added this Valhalla Room reverb. And I'll show you, I'm going to remove this later on. When I isolate this, it sounds like I overdid it. But when you hear it in the mix, it actually puts the plucks into a really nice space so that the arpeggiator is not interfering with the other elements, kind of sits in its own lane. And of course, once I had the progression, I created a couple more layers, and I was using the classic strategy that I was mentioning before, which is to consider what is the timbre you're going for the different layers, and then what about the envelopes? Do you want some with a very fast attack and a fast transient, and do you want some that maybe have a slower attack? This is really a paraphrasing of Aristotle's notion, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When individual components work together in harmony, they create something far more powerful and effective than they could on their own. So for the next layer, I created this pluck, which kind of reminded me of Deadmau5's song, Our Guru. Again, it's that triangle wave back, and we've got the cutoff being modulated by the envelope, and this one, you'll hear it. What do you notice about it? You'll notice there is a ton of delay on this sound. I've got the feedback knob up, pretty solid mix ratio, and then I've also got more stereo spreading in the highs, as well as the Valhalla Room, some classic kickstart. And as usual, on the first part of the channel strip, I have this subtractive EQ, as well as some dynamic band EQ, just to make sure that frequencies that have some buildup are tamed. And remember, you'll notice that this has a very fast transient, a fast attack, so it's working nicely with my first layer. The next layer I added was this reverb to pluck, and it has a softer attack than the first two. So again, I'm differentiating these layers by their ADSR envelope. I'm going to pull it up here. So that feels like it's more in the clouds. It's kind of gentle and soft, and it's going to add a little more texture to the sound we're building. Pretty much the same processing on this channel strip. I'm going and I'm looking at any bands where I feel like the frequency is building up too much, add a little bit of stereo spread, some Valhalla Room, as well as the kickstart. And the final layer in the plucks is this Bit Crush pluck. And what I was doing here was I actually found a preset I really liked, again, trying to move quickly. And what's crucial to this layer is that I added this distortion here with the downsample effect, so it has a little bit of a Bit Crush vibe to it. So we're looking at 4 layers here, and I created a summing stack to route all of their outputs to a single channel where I could add some more EQ, taming a little bit of the upper mids as well as some highs, and then I added some compression to glue it all together. Now listen to the sound we get when we have all of these layers playing together with the bus processing. Think of each layer as a brick. A single brick can't do much, but when you add bricks in mortar, the bus processing, then you can build a wall, which can stop an army. That's the kind of analogy I think of. So I'm going to show you now what it sounds like before the plucks and what it sounds like after. So it sounds so much more cohesive, more expansive, and I really feel like we have a song building here. The missing link now is the bass line. We got to get a bass in there to fill out that low end. So my priority is always going to be the melody in a song, but as a house and techno producer, it's critical to consider the importance of the bass and the kick, so we can't overlook this portion of the song. That being said, it doesn't have to be too complicating. I created a bass line here which is just going to follow the root notes of the chord. So this bass line is different in the drop in that it doesn't have that legato pattern, but it's still going to follow the chords in a little bit of a syncopated rhythm. And for this, I just picked out a preset I like to use from Serum, this bass tapes here. Threw a little bit of processing on it, some EQ, again taking out any sort of problematic band, as well as the kick start to make sure that my bass is not fighting too much with the kick drum. And for this mid bass layer, I also sent this signal to a chorus bus with Echo Boy Jr. here, some rich chorus, and that's just going to make the bass sound a little louder. You don't want to have any sort of chorus or delay on the extreme low end of your song. You can get away with it with some mid lows, but I only applied this effect for the mid bass. Additionally, I created this crunch bass layer. This one complements it nicely because it has more of a transient and some high-end presence. This is what that sounds like on its own. So you can see that I took out the low end because I just wanted that upper mid region as well as the highs, giving it a little bit of an attack, a bit of a snappy sound. And then I also added a little bit of compression and once again, kickstart. In the final layer, which is the most overlooked layer, but easily the most important layer, perhaps even in the entire song, is the sub bass. I've been using this plugin called Sub Destroyer for a really long time just to get a very simple sub in there. You know, you don't need to pull up Serum or anything else. You just want a nice low end tone. And I'll run through the processing here real quick. Again, some EQ to cut out some of the highs and to focus just on that low end. CLA 3A, doing some saturation and bringing a little bit of warmth as well as some gain reduction. Kickstart. And then finally Ozone 9. This may even be a little bit redundant, but I just wanted to ensure there was no stereoization of the low end. I wanted it to be completely mono. So I brought down band 1 and you can see here from the visualization, it's entirely in mono. And the last element I added to this bass layer is this pluck, which is creating a kind of explosive start to each measure. So you can see I didn't even do anything with the EQ there, but I added a little bit of Valhalla Vintage Verb as well as kickstart. And then we'll go into the plugin itself and check out that preset. So this is just kind of a Medusa style preset I really like. So I turned on Hyper to add some dimensionality to the sound, and then I cranked up the feedback on the delay as well as the mix knob. I've got it at a pretty generous 35%. And that's just gonna create this ping pong effect as the song moves through the drop. I normally wouldn't put that much delay on a sound, but I kind of think about it like with a recipe. You wouldn't just eat raw garlic, but if you were to saute it and put it in a tomato sauce, make some pasta bolognese or something like that, the garlic serves its purpose and it has its place. So altogether, this is the low end. And for this, I just did some subtractive EQ as well as some dynamic band EQs to do some small boosts and reductions throughout. I even threw on Saturn and Pro MB for some multiband compression, but you gotta trust your ears. Ultimately, I felt like both of those plugins were squashing the bass sound too much and things were already sounding good to my ears. I didn't need to use them, so I took them off. So I feel like things are really in a good place here with the plucks, the vocals, the low end. So I'm going to turn my attention to creating some textures to heighten the atmosphere of the track and adding some effects, which are also going to really just drive home the most important sections of the song. As far as effects go, I really just use some risers and downshifters, your classic stuff, as well as a couple tonal textures to add a little bit of sonic variety. I've got a grab folder on my desktop, so I usually just reach in there to grab my effects. This is ballpark what it's sounding like. And I don't even usually use EQ on this. I mean, I'll cut out some of the lows and the highs just so there isn't any frequency buildup. But what's most important is just getting the levels right and making sure that the effects aren't too loud. So I didn't even play the downshifters there, but I will show you that all together in a second. I'm just going to briefly go through the textures I added in the ambience, and then we'll hear the final result. So the ambient textural loops, there are just a couple here, and I really focused on bringing these in the verses because I wanted to establish a mood from the get-go. Here's an ambient piano that I looped. as well as these lush forest pads, which I just called Scary Forest because they had this kind of ominous feel to them. All right, I had a technical issue with the sound, but I'm back now and I'm going to show you how I finished this song. So where we left off, we had these first two ambient piano layers, and then I added in this third layer, which is an ambient piano loop, just for a little bit of variety right before we get into the drop. And then I actually took everything out right before we hit the drop. This is what those elements sound like together. And we'll fast forward and I'll show you the third element. So it sounds a little bit abrupt in my version right now, but it's going to sound great in the mix, and that's what's most important. And like I said, you can see here, I cut everything out in that transitional phase right before the drop. So let's hear what those three elements are doing all together in the mix. So there you have it. You can see I dropped out all of those elements right before the chorus to create that contrast. And then finally in the choruses, I added this layer, which I'm calling bounced synth layer. And really what it is it's a parallel processed layer of the synths and leads. And so what I did here is I put Pro Q on it, and this is going to band pass the signal. So we're going to cut out everything below 232 hertz and everything above about 19.6K. So you can't even really hear this, but sometimes it just adds a little bit of hiss or a little bit of pressure in the high end. So I removed that. Next up, I brought in fresh air and I put this on 9% for the high end because I just like how this processes high end. It's a really, really good plugin. So that worked for me there. And I actually had mid-range up at about 3%. So this is just doing a little bit of enhancement on the frequencies. Finally, I brought in K7D to add in some delay at 144 milliseconds. So this is just a moderate delay and a fairly low feedback at about 20. But this is just going to add a little bit of more space to this layer. So I'm going to show you that layer now in solo. So you can hear it's super delayed, but I think it works really nicely in the mix. Let's hear it with everything else. To maintain a little bit of suspense for our final reveal, I'm actually going to take out the leads here for a second, and it's also going to allow us to hear what this parallel layer is doing a little more effectively. And without. Do you hear it? You hear what's going on? Going back to my garlic analogy, nobody's going to want to eat raw garlic, but you make it into a pesto, nice pasta dish, starts to make sense. This layer on its own, the bounce synth layer, it's a little weird, but in the mix, it works. So I'm really happy with how things sound, but I still felt like at the beginning I was relying a little too heavily on some simple loops. I felt like I had to add a little bit more interest with the drum section. So I brought in 3 new layers just as a final touch. A rim shot, an open hat, and a tambourine loop. Altogether, I think they work really nicely with that main catchy hat loop I have. So let's hear it before. And after. So there you go. Just a little bit of variety goes a long way. Now the final thing I did was I brought in these 2 additional bass layers at the beginning. These are actually identical to the bass pattern that plays in the drop, but I brought them into the intro section because I felt like that legato bass pattern was just a little bit of a plain pattern. It needed some syncopation to it. So let's hear the legato before I brought in that new pattern. Let's hear it now with this pattern in the mix. Some additional groove goes a long way. Now I have the arrangement down, the elements are sounding good. The final step was to do a little bit of mixing and to really knock out that master. But first, a quick message. I don't promote anything that I wouldn't use myself. If it's crap, I don't want you to waste your money on it. But if it's useful, I will definitely tell you about it. Today, I'd like to introduce you to LANDR, which is a mastering software as well as a digital service provider I've been working with for years. I've used LANDR to master countless songs, and I distribute songs to all stores like Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon using LANDR. And here's the deal. Today, you can get a plan using my code for 20% off of the yearly standard plan and 38% off the yearly pro plan. I personally recommend the yearly standard plan, which comes out to about $10 a month or $9.60 to be precise. Alternatively, you can try the standard plan risk-free for 3 days and then pay monthly. Monthly does cost a little more than yearly, but you'll get 20% off your first month of standard using my code. Okay, but why is LANDR worth it? Here are the 3 key things I love about LANDR and why I would recommend it. 1. Unlimited distribution and full royalty payout to the artist. I can distribute my music to all the major platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, and more with unlimited releases. Whether it's 2 songs or 500 songs, LANDR's got your back. And the best part, I keep 100% of my royalties. Once you sign up, there's no additional fee. LANDR handles everything from distribution to collecting your royalties and delivering your payments. Payouts are fast and simple, whether you prefer ACH or PayPal. Plus, their advanced insights let me track streams, trends, and other critical data for each of my releases. 2. AI mastering. LANDR's AI mastering is fantastic. When I need to send a quick bounce to a vocalist, collaborator, or friend, I simply upload my track to their site and it's mastered intelligently and near instantaneously. Plus, with customizable settings like open or warm, I can fine-tune the sound to match my vision. And number 3, the mastering plugin. LANDR's own mastering plugin provides the ultimate flexibility, allowing me to work directly in my DAW. It listens to my mix and adjusts it for that final, polished, mastered sound automatically and intelligently. It's a crucial tool for making sure my tracks are perfectly tuned and ready for release. As you'll see at the end of this video, I actually use the plugin as a final touch on my mastering chain. But that's not all. On their lowest plan, LANDR gives you $2,000 worth of plugins a month, including powerful tools like LANDR Chromatic, Baby Audio Tape Emulation, and Eventide's Crush Station. And on their pro plan, you're looking at $4,000 of value. Plus, they offer sample credits to their sample pack store, which is just like Splice, and free courses to help you grow as a producer and songwriter. If you're serious about your music, I highly recommend you check out LANDR. So returning to our session, let's take a look at the master chain. It's very simple. The first thing I did is I put on Pro Q3 just to take out the extreme low end and any mud that may exist around those frequencies. Then I selected the SSL G compressor. I've always felt this is a fantastic plugin to glue your mix together. I wasn't going for too much compression here. Check out what the meter is doing in the verses. It's doing maybe 1 dB, and then when we get to the choruses, it's doing about 3.5, 4 dB. So I'm not trying to push this too hard. I'm just trying to glue the mix together at this point. So what did I do within the plugin to glue this? Well, I set a fast attack at about 3 milliseconds. Then I set the threshold at 14.8. Didn't want to mess with that too much. And then about 1.5 dB of makeup gain. Finally, I turned on analog for some analog character. I wasn't worried about loudness at this point, so I moved on and I loaded up Gullfoss. Now, Gullfoss is a mastering EQ, so it's going to do a little bit of work on the frequency balance and the tonal quality of the song. It also has an adaptive EQ algorithm, so any adjustments I do here are going to be dynamic throughout the track. Now let's check the parameters. I put recover up to 6%. And then with this parameter here, brighten, this is going to add some tonal clarity and some openness without exaggerating the highs. Again, I use this sparingly at just 12%. And honestly, I would play this for you right now, but the adjustments are so minute that you probably wouldn't even hear what Gullfoss is doing if I were to A/B it right now. So you'll hear it in just a second when I play it with all of the other plugins on my master chain alongside it. So let's move on to Greg Wells' Mixcentric. I'll just explain very quickly what this does. This offers you single knob control over 3 different parameters: EQ, compression, and harmonic distortion. You got some presets here, but I don't even mess with those because it's such a simple plugin. I just mess with this level here, set the intensity. In this case, I went for about 13%, but I'll show you what it does. If I play it, let's crank it up and see what happens. So you can hear that it has pretty pronounced effects to the mix. So I dialed it back down, put it at 13% because I think that was the sweet spot for this song. And remember, this has 3 parameters to it. My leg fell asleep there for a second, but I'll explain what those 3 parameters do. The EQ algorithm within this is very good at further refining the tonal balance in a musical and smooth way. The compression will tighten the dynamic range, and the harmonic distortion will add some warmth to the mix as a final touch, kind of like the UAD Oxford Inflator if you've ever worked with that. And as a final point, just remember, this single knob tweaks all 3 of those components in concert with each other. So I'm really happy with how things are sounding so far. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach for this Pro MB multi-band compressor and just focus on a couple different bands that I want to process. So let's play it here. So you'll see I have compressed the high end a little bit and I've turned it up about 0.86 dB, so almost 1 dB, just a slight notch in the volume right there. Next, I'm compressing this band at 388 Hertz because I felt like this sounded a little bit boxy. I'm going to solo it here for you. So you can see it's actually kind of a pronounced effect right there, but it did a lot just to remove the boxiness that I was hearing in the mix. Then I thought this was a really critical band, around 150 Hertz. I added a little bit of expansion because I wanted the kick as well as the bass to have a little bit more punch. Let's hear it. Here it is with it off. You can't hear it so well right now, but again, this is gonna all be noticeable in the final product when you put all of these different layers on the master chain together. Additionally, you're gonna hear this emphasis in the drop where the kick is especially present and the bass is especially prominent. Now you'll see I have smart limit here. I was just referencing some levels with this. I actually didn't even use this for any processing, so I turned it right off. And now the last thing I used, which is actually a really critical part of my process, is the LANDR mastering plugin. Now, of course, you can get this plugin in either of the different bundles that I mentioned earlier, the different plans. I use the Pro one, I use the totally souped up one because I like to have total control of what I'm doing in that final layer of the master. The main thing I use this plugin for is getting the track to a professional radio-ready volume while preserving the dynamics. What's cool about it is it has a smart listening feature which offers a really good starting point. So you could play the track from anywhere and it's going to start listening and determine some levels. I'll just demonstrate it right here. So here are the results it came up with. It set the level right for me, so we have this at the right volume in LUFS for Spotify. It also did a little bit of work in terms of setting the dynamics and character, but mostly it just got the gain right for that professional volume. And in my case, I love to just have total control. So what I do is I then go in and I tweak some of these parameters just to refine things a little bit further. So the first thing I did is I actually turned down the input gain just slightly to about negative 13.26 dB. I thought that sounded better. Then I added 0.5 dB to the low end for a little bit of a subtle lift. And then I listened closely to the mid-range and I felt like this needed to go up by about 2 dB. So I locked that in and I didn't even touch the high end. I was happy with where that sat. Next, I looked down at the stereo field here. I felt like things were a little bit wide. I want that kick and that bass to be front and center. So I put this on 17% focus away from width. And then I took the compressor down from 5 to 1.9 because I felt like the sound was just a little too heavily compressed. Let's do that right here. 1.9. And then I left de-esser alone. I left presence alone because I was just really happy with the results I got. Now, these subtle tweaks make a huge difference at the end of the day. So let's listen to everything we've come up with finally and hear it all in the mix with our master chain. Before.
Started to move
All right, so we see what the master is doing. Now let's step back and listen to the final product, everything together, everything we worked on here today.
The day after you said goodbye, all I did was lay in bed and cry. But after 1 month I started to move on, and after 2 I felt alright. Then 3 months in, you were off my mind. Month 4 and 5, I was living my life. I was better and didn't have to try not to think of you until you reached out and said, remember that night we went for a drive to 30 in the morning. I kissed you, it was boring. We held each other tight before the night was over. You looked over your shoulder. Oh, I was doing fine. You said, remember that night, remember that night. Oh, I was doing fine. You said, remember that night, remember that night. The day after.
So here's my final takeaway. The challenge of making a song looms large in your head, but the actual mechanics of producing it are fairly straightforward. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Just sit down, get to work, and you can create some awesome stuff. If you make this a daily habit or even a weekly habit, I guarantee you will have at least 20 to 30 good songs by the end of the year. And in the very least, you'll become a better producer and songwriter along the way. Don't overthink it. You'll be surprised when you remove the need for perfection and just sit down to work. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel as it will allow me to make more videos like this for you guys in the near future. And what type of content would you like to see next? Drop me a comment below and I'll check them out so I can make a new video for you guys very soon. This has been Astara in the studio. I'll see you all next time.